Good morning. Thank you to all the farmers, friends, and allied industry representatives for joining us for our Feed Your Mind series. While we wish we were shaking hands and seeing each other at our traditional annual meeting, perhaps there is some silver lining with meeting this way. For an example, we can join Secretary Vilsack for an update on global exports from our milking barn. I've been working with Secretary Vilsack for a number of years now in my role as chair of the DMI Export Committee. The Secretary is a well-recognized voice on U.S. agriculture and dairy. He has a respectable professional career in political and civil service, which you can read all about in our online forum. I've come to know the Secretary as a very honest, fair, and diplomatic man. He's certainly dedicated to the success of dairy, and he knows his way around a glass of milk. With that, it is an honor, Mr. Secretary, to welcome you to our Feed Your Mind virtual learning series for farmers and others interested in the topic of growing U.S. dairy exports.
Well, John, thank you very, very much for that kind introduction, and probably should be honest about this. I do know my way around a glass of chocolate milk, that is for sure. That's one of the standard lines at the end of the day. I always try to end my day with a glass of chocolate milk. So I appreciate you making that observation. And I want to thank you for the leadership that you have provided on the Export Council and provided in terms of keeping abreast of the export activities of US DEC. We have appreciated your advice and counsel and your interest. And you are serving dairy farmers across the United States extraordinarily well. So thank you for the time. And to Carrie Ann and her team at Dairy West, I just want to thank you for the tremendous enthusiasm with which you approach your work on behalf of farmers out in the West. I will tell you that we've appreciated the partnership that we've developed, and we look forward to strengthening and furthering that partnership based on some suggestions and information you've provided to deepen our relationship. And we're looking forward to showcasing the work of Dairy West at the new Center for Dairy Excellence, which I'll talk about in just a few minutes. So I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you today, and I will tell you that I wish I was out there with you personally. It's always a beautiful time to be out west, but unfortunately, because of the virus, we're kind of stuck where we are. You know, I was thinking about the newsletter that we put out as a family at the end of the year. We basically put together a newsletter. We put it in our holiday greeting card, and it allows us the opportunity to sort of review the year. We start at the beginning of the year and we work our way through the year with highlighting activities that our family was engaged and involved in. So I started thinking about that, and I started thinking about where we were as an industry at the beginning of 2020, the first several months of 2020. I think we were all incredibly optimistic about a year that would finally turn things around for dairy farmers, that would lead to better prices and more activity. We knew that there was a USMCA trade agreement that was going to be ratified by Congress, that hopefully with proper implementation would provide new opportunities in the Canadian market. We looked forward to the continued negotiations and ultimate resolution of the Phase 1 China agreement, and the hope that that would lead to new opportunities. We're already taking advantage of the Phase 1 Japan trade agreement that encouraged us to be more competitive in that very important market. So we were very optimistic. The global economy was growing. It looked to us as if there were new opportunities on the trade front, perhaps a negotiated trade agreement with the United Kingdom, the second largest importer of cheese in the world. We thought that there was an opportunity to potentially look at long-range trade opportunities in Africa with negotiations starting with Kenya. And so we were optimistic. We were beginning the third full year of the next 5% plan, which you all have invested in and supported. That has led, as you know, to us adding additional people in these key markets. We've added retail specialists in the Middle East and North Africa market to work with large grocery stores to highlight U.S. cheeses to make sure that they're being merchandised properly. We put together resources in Southeast Asia to hire an application specialist to work on new innovative snacks and beverages using dairy ingredients. We looked forward to working with a new hire in Japan who was well connected to the food manufacturing industry and understood the dairy industry incredibly well, having worked in that industry for a number of years in Japan. So we added more people. We looked forward to developing and deepening our partnerships with the universities, as we have in China, to develop new and innovative products that are fitted for a particular Asian market. We continued our work at building the next generation of cheese leaders in chefs and food manufacturing leaders at culinary institutes, folks that were getting educated in Japan, in Korea, in other locations. We were giving them basically a basic course on U.S. cheeses and encouraging them to use those recipes, those ideas, as they went out and began working at high-end restaurants and hotels. And of course, we continued to double down on significant and aggressive promotion of U.S. dairy products. We have an interesting partnership with Costco, where we were providing samples in many of their Asian stores. And in Mexico, we worked with the Dietetic Association in Korea, for example, to make sure that people understood the power of whey protein, and particularly for senior citizens who might be in nursing homes. We look forward to continued promotions in retail stores with our pop-up truck that appeared from time to time, telling the U.S. cheese and dairy story. So we were excited about 2020. We knew that we were going to launch the first ever Center for Dairy Excellence in Singapore. We knew that this would create an opportunity for us to tell the story every single day about the incredible work of the dairy farmers of the United States. That incredible work that has seen an increase in productivity that's unmatched. You know, it's amazing to know that in just a relatively short period of time, one generation, more milk is being produced with less water, less land, less inputs, because of the incredible efficiency of the dairy farmers in the United States. And we thought the Center of Dairy Excellence would give us the opportunity to tell that story and much more. And we've seen results from the Next 5% plan. We knew that it was designed to provide more value, more volume, more milk solids in dairy in exports, and hopefully would increase our global market share of sales. We knew this was important to the 34,000 dairy farmer operations throughout the United States, family farm operations that were having to survive some very difficult and tough years, and we thought they could be optimistic about 2020. We knew that it was also important to nearly 100,000 people who work in the dairy industry processing the milk that you all produce into a variety of products that we enjoy domestically and obviously now export. And we were excited about the opportunity to tell the sustainability story, which is growing in importance and significance in export markets. The amazing work that's being done on the Net Zero Initiative, which now is capturing a lot of attention. Recently, Nestle's dedicated and committed $10 million over the next 5 years to helping the U.S. dairy industry achieve the strategies and the technologies that will enable it to be a net zero emitter at some point in time in the future. That $10 million was matched recently by a grant from the Foundation for Food and Agriculture, which is providing an additional $10 million over the course of the next several years to aid in the research that's necessary to create the data that will support the ability of the federal government ultimately to provide additional support and help. So exciting opportunities, great opportunities, knowing that we had made the decision to really focus on diversifying the export market. As important as the Mexican and Latin American market was, we also recognized the need for us to continue investing in the Middle East and Asia and Australia and South America and Latin America as additional market opportunities. Diversifying as well, not only in markets, but also in product, and diversifying as well in terms of who we can service, retail to food service to food manufacturing. So optimistic, looking forward to an exciting 2020. Well, it's been exciting, all right, but for a lot of different reasons. We were hit with a pandemic early in the year, and we began to see an impact on exports initially because ports, particularly in China, were basically shut down. Workforces got sick, workforces were diminished, container ships weren't able to be loaded and unloaded, and there was a backlog. We saw food service in Asia literally shut down. Restaurants, high-end hotels not able to provide any services, resulting in a significant disruption of the supply chain. We knew that this would potentially get to the United States, and it did, and we saw a rather dramatic impact and effect as well. on food service, with nearly 50% of the food that goes into the food service supply chain all of a sudden stopped. It was a more difficult time for the U.S. to pivot into transferring those food resources into the food banks and the food nutrition programs that are so vital, especially since we saw a rather significant increase in unemployment. And we just simply saw a disruption that required us to rethink how to approach exports in the year 2020. And so we at US DEC, with your help and assistance and the resources that you all have provided, we began to pivot and fairly quickly. We began to look at the calendar and realize that there were a number of conferences and trade shows that we wanted to attend, that we wanted to be part of, but realized that we probably wouldn't be able to travel to these locations. While the Asian countries recovered more quickly than we have from the virus, they began to have more opportunities for get-togethers, but they also required those traveling from other countries to quarantine for up to 14 days before they could participate. So that made it virtually impossible for us to physically be in the locations of trade shows and conferences. And so we began the process of figuring out how we could do this virtually. And we have had a number of successful virtual trade shows and conferences where we've been able to tell the U.S. dairy story, even though we were not physically present. We began to use more aggressively social media. We now have nearly 90,000 followers and subscribers worldwide. We use social media to develop a series of recipes, little vignettes on the use of U.S. dairy products and particularly cheeses. We used influencers in key markets. We had, for example, a chef that's well known in the Middle East and North Africa market do a series of recipes. We were shocked at the number of hits that received on social media, over 400,000 hits. So we began to see opportunity here in this pandemic-filled, challenging world that we were living in. We looked at ways in which we could create a series of videos that could be distributed in a variety of languages to encourage people to use a variety of cheeses. For example, right now in Japan, they are considering a new promotion where they are going to talk about the family of Jack, Pepper Jack and Monterey Jack, and on hamburgers, basically transitioning from the use of processed cheese to a variety of cheeses to encourage more hamburger consumption, more cheeseburger consumption in Japan, and utilizing U.S. cheeses to do that. So we saw a series of steps done by our team to create interest, excitement, and passion over U.S. dairy products. We also, had to continue doing the work, the important work that is involved in trying to open up trade opportunities. For example, we had worked very hard at the end of last year and the beginning of this year to encourage China to embrace the notion of permeate for the use of rebuilding their hog industry. But one of the problems of using the way permeate was the fact that it was hit with a retaliatory tariff as a result of the trade discussions between our two countries. And so we began the process of educating the Chinese government on the need for them to essentially waive or reduce that retaliatory tariff in their best interest. And they eventually did that for a year, and then they recently re-upped it for another year. So we have now 2 years of access to that market without a very anti-competitive retaliatory tariff, making it more difficult for us to sell product. And we've seen a dramatic increase in the purchases by China of that product. We applied that same strategy to Vietnam, where we were at a disadvantage with some of our competitors because they had entered into trade agreements. We didn't have a trade agreement with Vietnam, but we encouraged the Vietnamese government to reduce their tariff to make it opportunities more available for U.S. dairy products. And the results were pretty good. And I will tell you, I think we were all surprised that we continued to see strong export growth in 2020. We've had 13 consecutive months of increased activity on the export side throughout the entire year of 2020. Volume is up 14% compared to last year. It is on a record-setting pace, potentially exceeding the record that was set just 2 years ago in 2018. We're about 214,000 metric tons ahead of where we were last year in terms of volume sales. But it's not just volume, it's also value. Value is up 13%, over $500 million more in value being sold this year than last year. Milk solids and exports have also improved. Last year it was in the neighborhood of 14 to 15%. Now it's in the neighborhood of 16 to 17%. And we're seeing a marked change and interest in where we sell product. We've always relied significantly on the Mexican market, but now what we see is the Southeast Asian market as being our #1 market from a volume perspective. So it certainly supports the notion of diversification in difficult times. And obviously, we're continuing to see strong and robust cheese sales in Southeast Asia, and in North Asia, and Japan and South Korea. So we're encouraged by that. The pivot that we undertook not only involved the importance of diversifying and of pivoting, but we also saw this in the budget. Obviously, we had allocated a substantial amount of money for travel, for in-person conferences and things of that nature. And the reality was that we weren't obviously going to be able to use those resources. So our team decided that it was important to consider should we do, what could we do that would put us in a better position over the next couple of years to be able to do an even better job on the trade side. And so we began a process of identifying a series of research projects where we were sort of reshifting or realigning the resources to basically give us the ability to get more information and more data. So we are now doing a research project on the United Kingdom to better understand and deepen our understanding of that market. Should there be an opportunity for us to have a trade agreement? Should there be a situation where, as a result of Brexit, the UK is more interested in potentially purchasing from countries other than countries in the EU? We also wanted to make sure that we were fully apprised of the opportunities over the long term that might potentially be available in Africa. And so there's an opportunity for us to sort of begin this process of understanding the sub-Saharan African market, starting with Kenya. We knew that the supply chain, for example, has been disrupted, that there is now sort of a conflict between the need for greater efficiency and profitability in the supply chain with resilience, based on the fact that we are not, it's not unlikely that we will be faced with pandemics in the future. And we want to make sure that we don't have the level of disconnect and disruption as we've had in the past. So we're now doing a study, taking a look at the supply chain. What changes do we think will be permanent? What changes do we think are temporary? How is that going to impact, and should it impact the way in which we approach a trade in the future? And we're excited, obviously, about the opening of the Center for Dairy Excellence. We also had to pivot in terms of not only just research and not just regular programming and promotions, but we also had to take a look at ways in which we could utilize the Center of Dairy Excellence, even though we were restricted in terms of people coming to the facility. And so we had a virtual launch a couple of weeks ago, incredibly successful. The media attention from that virtual launch reached over 100 million people in terms of articles that were written, podcasts and blogs and other ways of educating people about the opening of this facility. And it is going to give us a tremendous capacity. We've already begun to use the test kitchen and the sensory panels to showcase U.S. product. You can go online, take a virtual tour of the center. We encourage you to do that so that you have an understanding of precisely how much capacity this is going to give us. We were pretty surprised at the response and reaction to virtual launch. We expected some attention, but we didn't expect being inundated with calls from people who we have been trying to get a hold of in that market for some time, who are now interested in coming to the center, taking a look at potential products, working with our membership. And so we're really, really excited about this. So bottom line, I think the investments that we've made in deepening our presence in the export market are paying off. I think the capacity of this industry to continue to diversify and continue to innovate is incredibly important in the future. I think it's important as well that we not only diversify in terms of product and diversify in terms of the kinds of opportunities that we create through retail, food manufacturing, and food service, but I think it's also very, very important that we diversify in terms of markets. And I think we saw this again this year very forcefully, with the Mexican economy not being as strong as we would like, the pandemic hitting them, the oil economy being low. That's a market that we're keeping an eye on. Obviously, we're excited about the opportunities in China, but we know at any point in time that can be disrupted by an international event in the South China Sea, or fuss with Hong Kong or Taiwan. Hong Kong in the news today. So there are ways in which we hope that continues, but we have to be concerned and wary that we don't become overly dependent on any particular market. That's why I think it's important for us to continue to look for ways to diversify. Bottom line, over the course of the last 3+ years of the Next 5% plan, we have not only seen more volume and more value and more milk solids and exports this year over last year, but we have seen a rather dramatic increase over the course of the last several years. We have seen a remarkable increase in the value, about a 48% increase in value period of time, about $1.5 billion more in value than at the end of 2016 before we launched this effort. We've seen about a 26-27% increase in volume since that time, and we've seen about a 20% increase in the percentage of milk solids going into exports. And we've been able to increase our global market share just a little bit, but pretty significant over the course of time. And this was in the face of trade issues, retaliatory tariffs, a pandemic. So I think it speaks well of the work that the U.S. dairy industry is doing, both on the farm side and on the processing side. And we appreciate the opportunity to partner with all of you to be able to promote and market U.S. dairy exports all over the world. Let me stop there. I've given you hopefully enough information to whet your appetite for Q&A, and I'll just stop there and be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Secretary. This is Jenny Nelson, the Senior Vice President of Innovation Partnerships for Dairy West. And before we open it up for Q&A, I would really like to extend our gratitude and appreciation to you for taking this time to share an overview of all the work being done by your team, both here in the U.S. and like you mentioned, all the new hires that have been placed around the globe. So with that, I'd like to encourage those of you in the audience tuning in to submit any questions you have via the chat function. And we will pose those to Secretary Vilsack as time allows throughout this session. So to kick things off, I would like to ask an initial question about the Center of Dairy Excellence. I know you briefly touched on this, but curious as to how you see potential individual processors and or state and regional units, such as myself at Dairy West, being able to tap into this facility, into its many resources to really showcase the products and processors that we have and we represent.
Well, first of all, we appreciate the fact you all put together a terrific video that we're anxious to showcase and to show at the center. When you go into the center, there is a wall that essentially allows us to play videos and to provide information. And our goal is to have that wall basically populated with information from the various aspects and various regions of the country, of the U.S. and dairy. And you all put together just a terrific video that will showcase what's going on out west. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is the ability to have a customer come in and say, I'm interested in this particular snack, or I'm interested in this particular innovative way to use cheese. How can your product, how can your ingredient, how can your cheese be tailored to by taste, by texture, by sodium or whatever? How can we create this snack that will be popular with people in my country, whether it's Vietnam or Thailand or Indonesia or Malaysia or Philippines or wherever it might be? This facility gives us the ability to bring people in and literally have them watch a sensory panel experience where they bring people off the street to basically test products. They're able to change the lighting. They're able to change everything about this so that you really get a good idea of what people really truly think of a particular snack or particular taste. The test kitchen gives us the ability to not only showcase and to utilize a particular recipe that they're interested, but as importantly, to basically, with the technology that we have, to be able to film these activities, to be able to translate them into various languages so that we can disperse this information worldwide, which is obviously going to be of tremendous benefit. The last benefit of this facility, I think, is that we, as you know, we have in-country teams that are working to sort of make connections with our members and the food manufacturing, food service, retail in the countries that we are dealing with. But we also have a full-time staff that will be staffing the CDE. And so in the past, the concern was that these folks would be in separate locations. Well, we've been able to basically bring our in-country team into the CDE. So basically it will improve communication and linkage between what we can do with the CDE and what is necessary for us to make the case for U.S. dairy in particular markets. And we think if this is successful, then it may provide a model for other markets where this type of facility might be of benefit.
That's fantastic. I know, we're all excited to be able to tap into that as a resource. So we are really looking forward to being there potentially in person in the distant future, I will say.
Right.
Next question that's come in is in relation to the pandemic and how you believe the pandemic has changed the way we are able to influence trade policy with key countries.
Well, I don't know that it's necessarily influenced the trade policy, but it certainly has influenced the way we have to understand the market. I mentioned this earlier. I think the industry, every industry has been impacted and affected by this pandemic. And certainly the food industry, the food service industry has really been impacted. We've seen a pivot and a change and a transfer from in folks going to restaurants to people basically picking up and taking out or having it delivered to their home. So we're going to see a change in the way in which people eat, where they eat and how they eat. And we have to be flexible enough to allow our products to be able to meet that new reality. And we've seen, fortunately, we've seen a pretty significant increase in activity on the cheese side in a number of these markets because cheese is sort of amenable to takeout and in-home delivery. So I think it's really more about understanding how the supply chain is going to respond as opposed to trade policy where whether you're going to have tariffs being assessed or things of that nature. That's more of a political consideration. That's more of a political approach. And obviously, we're going to have a potentially different administration. That administration may have a different attitude and a different approach to tariffs. I suspect it will. So there may not be quite as much of a disruption on that side as we've seen in the last couple of years. And hopefully that means that we have greater stability in trade policy so that we have greater predictability. But I think the supply chain is now faced with the dilemma of deciding what is more important. Is efficiency more important? So you're talking about just-in-time inventory. So there's not a great deal of storage, not a great deal of warehousing of product, or is there being a shift to being maybe perhaps slightly less efficient, but much more resilient? And we're seeing, particularly in Southeast Asia and to a certain extent in China, we're seeing the beginning of sort of stockpiling of product, I think, in light of the fact that they believe that this pandemic is not the last one we're going to face.
Well said. I think we've all, had the opportunity to experience firsthand, the way we're eating, both here domestically as well as globally. So to see, the food service industry, pivot across the globe has been commendable.
Well, and one of the challenges of this, I think, is to understand how, first of all, is to be amazed at how well we actually did pivot, particularly in the United States. We had a tremendous disruption at the beginning with the food service being shut down, and there was a pivot ultimately to providing food assistance. And the challenge, I think, in the future is to make sure that side of the equation, the food banks and so forth, are equipped to do a better job of receiving products, perishable products, being able to refrigerate and store them properly, and have the space and the refrigeration capacity to do so that we're not in a position as we were early in this pandemic to have milk that had no home. We also, I think, have to take a look at ways in which we can provide the financial assistance that removes the disincentive to donate or disincentive to further process in situations like this that resulted in us seeing product being destroyed and dumped. And the food box program, I think, so obviously has helped. It certainly raised the price of cheese in this country, but as it raised the price of cheese, it also created some challenges and hurdles in terms of exports. So you obviously want to make sure that you've got that balance in place, and you've got a system that basically doesn't totally disrupt market forces to the point where you are uncompetitive in some markets.
I think that the hunger platform is one area that I think we can all, give ourselves a pat on the back. I know the dairy community has been very vested in making sure that we're feeding that, that underserved population base that goes through the food bank system. So we appreciate everybody's efforts there to really rally around that. Next question that's coming in, Secretary Vilsack, how does the farm program of third-party verification compare to other countries' animal, land, and work repair programs? And how important are these for Southeast Asian markets?
Well, this is part of the sustainability story that the U.S. dairy producer can tell that is unlike any other sustainability story by any other producer anywhere else in the world. And it's got several components, one of which is the farm program, which is an internationally certified animal care system that the vast majority of dairy production in this country is following. It is not only, we were not only the first dairy industry to embrace and adopt and to have it certified by an international certifying body, but we are the first as well to have that certifying body recertify because continued improvements are being made to that program. It is an incredibly important component of a very important aspect if we are going to be competitive in export markets in the future, and for that matter, in domestic markets. We have got to be able to tell and retell and emphasize the sustainability story that says we do have an animal care standard second to none. We do have a process by which we are using less water, less land, less inputs to produce more milk. We do have a system that is designed to reduce our greenhouse gas emission footprint. And we are the only producers, along with our Canadian friends, who have actually seen a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 19% in the last 10 years. Europe can't say that, New Zealand can't say that, and it's going to be a long time before anybody can match our record. And particularly if we embrace this opportunity for net zero as an industry, not necessarily as individual farms, but as an industry getting to that point where some of our larger farms can maybe get to a negative number, and doing it, creating new revenue streams for farmers, I think creates a whole new opportunity for the dairy industry in the United States and allows us to go into these markets and aggressively promote this product as not only good and delicious and safe and sustainable, or ample supply and steady supply, but it's also been the most sustainably produced dairy product in the world. And that does matter. It matters very seriously to the folks in the Asian countries that have many coastal communities that are seeing rising sea levels, and they're deeply concerned about that. And they want to make sure that they're consuming a resource. The money that they spend on food is not going to advance and accelerate that climate disruption, but is in fact trying to adapt to it and mitigate the consequences of that climate disruption. So it's very, very important.
So in a nutshell, it's great to see the U.S. industry really setting the standards and the pace for animal care, sustainability efforts, and all of that. So extremely.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. I think that's absolutely right. And I have had actual circumstances when I was able to travel overseas, talking to potential customers who were buying our cheeses or buying our products, and basically telling them what the U.S. dairy industry and the farmers were doing in the United States, and they were very, very impressed with it and very interested in showcasing that as they marketed our products to their customers.
Wonderful. I'm going to flip gears a little bit on you. The next question that's coming in is in regards to the new administration. And is it realistic to expect that Biden and his new administration will pursue TPP discussions?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I don't know that I necessarily have any significant insight, but I would say this. I think there is going to be a different approach to China than the Trump administration. And I think that approach is to recognize that there are deep concerns about China and China's influence in Asia by other Asian countries. And one way of balancing and addressing those concerns and creating new trade opportunities for us is by entering into agreements and relationships with those other countries as a balance against China having too much influence in Asia and too much influence globally. So I think it is conceivable that you will see over the period of 4 years some interest in trying to create the opportunity potentially for the U.S. to reconnect with the partners that they had negotiated the TPP with. There would probably have to be some additional changes to that agreement in order for us to get the kind of political support to get it done. But I think if it's explained as a balance to China, then I think a lot of the political concerns could potentially be addressed. And I think it's also, it will put us in a better position relative to negotiating with China if we have that balancing effort. We obviously want to maintain the benefits, if you will, of phase one. We want to see China get back to where they once were in terms of purchasing agricultural products from the U.S. They're still not on track by the end of this year, the first part of next year, to actually live up to the promises they made in the phase one agreement. I think they're about 27% behind where they need to be in order to be able to purchase $32 billion of additional agricultural products, which just simply gets China and the U.S. back to where that relationship was in 2017 before the retaliatory tariffs were assessed. So in terms of actual growth in the market, that's not what we're talking about. We're just trying to get back to the square one. The challenge with that, with the approach that the Trump administration took with China, wasn't that they didn't have legitimate cause for concern. They clearly did. No question about that. China does not treat the U.S. companies that are doing business in China fairly, and it doesn't treat anybody else's companies trying to do business in China fairly. But the problem was that we went alone, and we went without any allies, without any other countries that are similarly being disadvantaged by the Chinese, and that put us in a position where China could easily create some friction by assessing retaliatory tariffs in response to our tariffs. And when they did this, they did it in a really smart way. When we assessed our tariffs on Chinese goods, the reality of those tariffs is that consumers across the United States ended up paying a little bit more for their products because the impact of a tariff ultimately gets to the consumer. But in China, when they assessed retaliatory tariffs, they only assessed them on items where they had another source, another way of getting that product. So what they did is they put the U.S. Soybeans, for example, at a competitive disadvantage, but they were able to purchase soybeans from Brazil and Argentina, which meant that their consumers never really felt the impact of the tariffs that we were assessing, or that they were assessing rather. And so they basically created a circumstance where they got the ability to hurt our agricultural products, but not hurt their consumers. In addition, what they did, obviously, with that retaliatory set of tariffs, is they shut off a market that was pretty important for us in a number of different commodities. So over a period of time, we saw surpluses build up in those commodities. So when China re-engaged with us and began purchasing again, they were purchasing those products at a discounted price. So they got the benefit of basically driving down the price when they started repurchasing, when they started purchasing again. So it's really tricky how to do this. And perhaps a better way is to enter into trade negotiations and relationships with countries that surround China, create that balance, and then use that as a competitive negotiation tool that doesn't hurt our consumers, creates new opportunities for our businesses, new markets, and diversifies markets, but also sends a message to China that they're going to have to change their way of doing business, or we'll just continue to look someplace else in the world to do business.
Yeah, with that said, I think we're all going to be watching closely to see how, the approach that Biden does take to, the opportunity to reconnect and negotiate in the future.
A lot of it has to do with, obviously, as well, who gets appointed to various positions. what's going on right now is a transition, and during the transition, there's a team of about 350 folks that are working in a facility in Washington, D.C., and basically they've been separated into teams. Each team sort of aligned with each department or mission area of the federal government. And as the vice president and the president-elect and the vice president-elect make decisions about who's going to be a cabinet member and who's going to be a U.S. trade representative and so forth, those nominees will end up working with those teams and getting a better understanding of the intricacies of the department and the issues that they're going to confront on day one, and beginning to develop the policies that will be advanced. And so it's an important period of time in order for an administration to get off on a good start. And obviously they have to make sure that they appoint people that will be more easily confirmed, because if you have difficulties getting your nominees confirmed, then there is a delay in getting policy implemented. There is a delay in getting fully staffed a department. I remember when I went in as secretary, I had 7 people, only 7 people on my staff at that point to run an agency that had 100,000 people working for it. And we were really shorthanded, but we were fortunate because we got a lot of the other positions filled within a couple of months. So by halfway through the first year, we had a full complement of people at USDA, and we were far ahead of many of the other departments in that respect.
Well, to say that we are optimistic is definitely an understatement here. So we're excited to see what the future holds with the new administration. Next question that's coming in through the queue is, do you think the new administration will maintain the food box program or put funds toward the SNAP program? Or will it be a combination of the two?
Well, I don't know that the food box program was and is designed as a program for a response to a particular crisis, i.e. the pandemic. And the challenge with the food box program is that it's very hard to put together a food box program, one size fits all, that actually takes into consideration the various demands and needs of consumers across the United States. So for example, if you put a food box program together, are you taking into consideration that many people that you're providing that box to may be diabetic and may not be able to eat whatever it is you're providing, or may not be able to digest it properly for whatever reason? That's why the SNAP program creates a little bit more flexibility. You give people the resource and the ability to go in and tailor their purchasing to meet their specific needs. So I would anticipate that there will be perhaps greater support for the SNAP program and greater opportunities to utilize that. Having said that, if we're faced with a crisis again, or a continuation of this crisis that ultimately results in a further shutdown of the economy, they may go back to the more traditional way of purchasing products, surplus products, so that there's not as much market disruption as can happen with a food box program. So I don't think that's going to be a regular feature of food service or of the nutrition programs in the U.S.
So with that said, do you think during, the possible administration transition that, barring a potential shutdown, do you think that there will be a pause or disruption in supporting those different programs?
Well, I don't think there'll be a pause in the food. I think the food box program will work its way out, work itself out. But I think you may see potentially an effort by a new administration, particularly if there has not been a coronavirus stimulus bill passed by this Congress. There no doubt will be something done by the next Congress, because it's going to take a while. If this vaccine that Pfizer announced is 90% effective and doesn't have any safety issues, even if we had a virus today, a vaccine today rather, it will take many months for that to be widely enough available and distributed and utilized for us to feel safe that we're on the other side of this pandemic. So there's likely going to be continued fits and starts with the economy, continued high unemployment. So there's going to be a need for some kind of support and help whether it's additional SNAP benefits so people have capacity to go in the grocery store and buy more, or whether it's purchases by USDA of surplus product, which is then distributed to food banks in the more traditional approach, or whether it's a revised food box program is yet to be determined. But my guess is they would be more inclined to SNAP and bonus purchases than necessarily continue the food box program.
Well, surely all of our fingers are crossed that something comes through from Pfizer sooner than later, and that we're all able to, tap into the availability of that sooner than later.
Amen.
So as we transition, the next question that comes in, you mentioned the UK as a major cheese importer. Our standard cheddar cheese is not likely the type of cheese they want. So how do we get to the point of manufacturing at scale cheese that can meet UK needs?
Well, I think first of all, understanding precisely what that market is and will be. Is there an opportunity for us to introduce US cheeses to the point where it does become something that some consumers in the UK would want? Or is there the need for us to alter the way in which we approach this? Our cheeses historically, I think the attitude over there has been, well, they make a lot of cheese, but the quality cheese is really made here in the EU. Well, the international cheese competitions recently, we've seen a marked increase in the number of awards that U.S. cheeses are receiving, and the quality of U.S. cheeses is now equal to, in some cases, better than our competitors. In fact, we had the #1 cheese in the world last year from Oregon, first time that had occurred, and so I think there is an opportunity here. But it's, first and foremost, we have to understand this market. And we have to understand it more deeply than we understand it, #1. #2, we have to understand the rules of the game. And frankly, the rules of the game haven't been set. And the reason they haven't been set is because the Brexit, the exit from the EU that was triggered a couple of years ago by a vote of the people over there, it hasn't been finalized. So we don't know what the rules are going to be. We don't know if there are going to be restrictions or difficulties or barriers that are created as a result of that agreement that make it difficult for us to negotiate an agreement here with the UK, or maybe it makes it easier. Maybe it creates a real opportunity. We just don't know. And so I've always been suspicious that the UK is essentially negotiating with us and negotiating with the EU, and essentially trying to use us and the EU off of each other in order to get the best possible deal for the UK. And an agreement with the UK is not going to be easy. It may be easy on the dairy side, but it may not be particularly easy when it comes to chlorinated chicken and hormones and beef and some of the other issues that have for many, many years made it more difficult for us to even talk about a negotiated trade agreement with any European country. So long way of saying, I'm not willing to concede that we can't at some point in time get an embracing of our cheese, but if it turns out that that's not the case, then by understanding the market, we'll be able to give instructions and directions to processors here in the US, and then they'll have to make the business decision whether or not there's enough of an opportunity for them to basically change or alter their manufacturing process to be able to meet the needs of the UK customers, or whether they still see a greater opportunity by staying and doing what they're currently doing and utilizing other markets, Southeast Asia, North Asia, China, etc. Excuse me.
While we're on the subject of the EU, can you maybe touch a little bit on geographical indicators? And what's your stance? What's your take on that issue?
Well, first and foremost, I think our team, the Consortium for Common Food Names, has done a terrific job of beginning the process of pushing back on a very aggressive effort by the EU with reference to GIs. I think in one sense, GIs is a tremendous compliment to the dairy farmers of the United States. I think it's a reflection that Europe has determined that they cannot and will not be able to compete with us in the long term because of the amazing productivity of US dairy. I think they believe that the only way they can compete is by getting us off the field. And the only way they can get us off the field, because we're going to continue to improve quality, we're going to continue to have a sustainability story that is equal to and better than anybody else's. We're going to continue to have safety. We're going to continue to have ample supply. We're going to continue to have functionality and versatility and flavor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The only way they can compete is by suggesting that they get to use only the name of a cheese that is commonly embraced by people, so that we are put at a competitive disadvantage. To get on the field, we have to convince folks to purchase a cheese that is actually Asiago or Gorgonzola. We just can't call it that. That is a very heavy burden and barrier to overcome. So that's why we are pushing back very strongly. And that's why we're creating coalitions. One of the things that we didn't do, hadn't done for quite some time, but the next 5% resource that you all have provided has enabled us to do, is to develop partnerships and alliances with other countries that are similarly situated to us relative to the EU. So now we can go into forums where the EU attempts to create barriers and attempts to embrace the GI notion for reasons other than science, and we're able to push back on that because it's not just the United States, but it's a number of other countries, smaller countries, developing countries that are with us on this. So that's been an important consideration. We continue to make sure that the U.S. Trade Representative's office, and I think they've been very good about this, understands the significance of the GI issue and raises this at every opportunity. It's particularly one of the big stumbling blocks on a UK and an EU trade agreement, is whether or not they are willing to concede the GIs and basically embrace our notion of more of a trademark system, in which if you want to protect a particular regional aspect, you can, but you can't take the common name of the cheese and only allow European producers to use that common name. And we've had some success recently. We've also entered into an agreement recently in Italy on mozzarella. So we're developing a variety of different mechanisms for responding to this. We're challenging GIs in courts in other countries. We're advancing the notion here within our own government in terms of trade negotiations and discussions. We're going into international forums and making the case that Europe should not be allowed to monopolize, that it's anti-consumer, it limits choice, it makes things more expensive for consumers. We have some really compelling arguments, and so we're aggressively using those arguments. And I think we're beginning to have enough that we're beginning to push back. And if by virtue of previously entered into trade agreements that the EU has with a Japan or a Mexico, we push back in those countries with making sure that the letter of those agreements is followed, and that they're not getting GI protection that hasn't been done in the proper way, with due process and giving us the ability to come in and make the case that it's a common name.
I've got to say, I love your positive interpretation of GI, which really is kind of setting, the U.S. sets itself apart. So we're viewed as potential competition. So I guess that's the beauty in it. So way to look at the positive side of things. I know we're nearing the end of the hour here. I did have a two-part question that came in to kind of kill two birds with one stone. There's the question of, the amount of labor that happens, in country, but now with the opportunity of doing things socially and virtually, does social media in the US drive a lot of consumer purchase decisions? So what role does social media play in other major trade markets in driving consumer behavior? And does dairy have an opportunity to leverage other social media platforms to better tell our stories?
Well, let me answer the second question first. Yes, I mean, there's no question that social media is prevalent and important in other markets, and we are utilizing social media, as I said earlier. We're seeing it expanded. We have 22 different platforms that we use in a variety of areas across the country, across the world, to get our message out and to get it out in a way that is acceptable. I think there's a very interesting dynamic taking place within the US as it relates to social media. Which also I think reflects and responds to the first part of the question in terms of the power of social media and consumer activities. So Tom Gallagher at DMI comes out one day and he says, we're entering into discussions with gamers in terms of trying to figure out ways in which we can promote dairy. And I thought to myself, what's he talking about? And he says, you folks familiar with the game called Minecraft? And then my grandkids, my 11-year-old and 6-year-old grandkids, they basically play Minecraft every day. And they're trying to teach me to play it, which is a very difficult lesson to learn. I mean, I just can't, I don't have the eye-hand coordination that you need to have to build these villages and so forth. But anyway, so he says, yeah, we're gonna talk to several of these people that they're gamers that they have followers. And he said one of these people is a guy called Mr. Beast, B-E-A-S-T, Mr. Beast. So I say to my grandkids, I said, who's Mr. Beast? Oh, he's gives you tips on how to use Minecraft and how to have greater success in Minecraft. He's great. Well, it turns out Mr. Beast has 71 million followers. Okay, just think about that for just a second. This is a guy, and what does he do for a living? He plays a game, and it's played by 120 million Americans. And of that number, 71 million follow this guy. So if he basically incorporates into his Minecraft lesson, a dairy lesson or a dairy farm or something about dairy, that could profoundly impact the decision that those younger consumers will make. They may go to their moms and dads and say, hey, we need to try this product, or we need to have this opportunity, or we're interested in milk, we're learning about dairy farms through Minecraft. All of a sudden we have the next generation of consumers demanding our product because Mr. Beast is saying it's the thing to do. And so it's a whole new world. And I think we're going to see less and less and less of the traditional media being the force that impacts and affects people's attitudes about things. And we're going to see more and more and more of the social media become prevalent, especially for consumers under the age of probably 35.
Well,
it's going to take.
I feel your pain when it comes to social media and the gaming industry in general. That definitely is not my era either. So when you talk about your grandkids, I talk about my kids, and it's meeting consumers where they're at.
Right, and I'm learning the lessons. My grandkids are learning the lessons in patience because I'm a really slow learner on this game, and I keep saying to them, look, I can't do it as fast as you can do it. You have to give me a break. I'm telling you, it's not easy.
Definitely a learning curve. And I think you and I have missed that boat, but that's okay. We'll let the kids and the grandkids take that over.
Absolutely.
Mr. Secretary Vilsack, I want to thank you so much for your time and joining us this morning for the updates and all the work that you are doing on behalf of the United States Dairy Export Council. And if there's three key words that I really took away from all of your comments here today, it was resiliency, optimism, and diversifying. So if we didn't take anything else away from that, I truly appreciate all of the work that you're doing on behalf of the entire dairy industry. I know it's commendable, and we all truly appreciate it. And without further ado, and no further questions from the audience, we would love to thank you for your time and appreciate all that you do.
I appreciate the support that you all have provided, and we're going to continue to work hard every single day to expand exports. So thanks again, everybody. Stay well.